And you're watching Roots TV Nigeria. Xenophobic attacks in South Africa is becoming common news, with reports that just a few days ago, 2 Nigerians lost their lives in these attacks. Now, while there are no official statistics as to the number of people who have died from these attacks, some numbers have it as high as 100 people have died since 2004 to xenophobic attacks in South Africa. Now, in this exclusive, we are giving you a never-seen-before perspective of xenophobia in South Africa. We are talking to South Africans who are living and working in Nigeria to understand truly what this is all about and what's fueling this particular attacks. I have right here in the studio Cecilia Russell. She is a journalist working here in Nigeria. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you.
And I have Larry Matobi. He's also living and working in Nigeria. Welcome.
Thank you, Gloria.
Okay. So the basic question a lot of people have been asking, why is there so much the sentiment against other Africans in South Africa? There's a general feeling that South Africans, indigenous South Africans, just either do not like other people from other African countries or just feel they are not welcome. Why does that feeling exist in South Africa?
I think that there is a feeling among some people in South Africa. You can't say it's a broad spectrum of feeling against people from Africa. Very often this kind of attack happens in a society where there is a level of people living in distressful situations, where they are poor, where they are fighting for their daily lives, and people who come from foreign lands come into the area, more often from Somalia or Zimbabwe or those two countries, and they start businesses, and perception is that perhaps, these people, as they would like to perceive them, are taking away our jobs, they're taking away our money and our opportunities. There have been several attempts over the years to try and educate people to understand that, that foreigners should be welcomed into our society. After all, we've had a very long history in which foreigners welcomed us
South
into
Africans,
their
yes,
country.
during the apartheid
So
period.
I think that there have been some attempts to educate people and tell people that these fears are unfounded, that they are not true, that in fact foreigners are not taking away opportunities. Very often when they come into the communities, they create opportunities, they create jobs, but this is very seldom seen. So I think it's a complex situation, and I'm not condoning it in any way. I think the lives of those 2 Nigerians and others
and so
earlier
many others
are the loss of those lives is tragic and terrible, and condolences to their families. But I think that somehow or another South Africa has a long way to go to educate people, to be welcoming, and to understand that migrants into a society very often bring opportunity and don't remove opportunity, and once that perception goes, we'll be in a better place.
Well, I'll stay with you, Cecilia, on this one, because a lot of people would be shocked that this is happening in South Africa, considering you have a better and a more stable economy than a lot of other African countries. So when some people say, oh, this is more economic, South Africans don't have jobs and their jobs are taken away by these migrants, we also know that some South Africans, a lot of South African employers would give a job to a South African first before even considering a migrant. We also know that economically you have a decent economy, at least decent, that's the word. So what would make these South Africans think that these migrants are doing better or are taking away their opportunities? It's very complex for a lot of people to understand, especially with South Africa.
I think that South Africa is a very complex society, a bit like Nigeria, in that it has a very wealthy population and a fairly large middle-class population that are on the one side, and a very poor population is largely living in townships and in slum conditions on the other side. You mustn't forget that despite South Africa's stable economy, it also has the highest youth unemployment rate per population of any country in the world. So you have a large percentage of people who are unemployed, who are living in distressful situations. South African people, in a way, are helped along because we've got a very strong social security network, but nevertheless, I have, friends of mine whose children are 30. There's, a son of 30 or a daughter of 30 who's never found a job, hasn't found a job yet with some education. So you must understand that it's in these circumstances that these negative perceptions about foreigners foment and become real. A couple of years ago, when I was working at the Star newspaper as a news editor, we had tremendous xenophobic violence. It moved from township to township, and people were targeted in horrible ways. We had a necklacing of a young man who was living in Ramaphosa Park. So this is not unusual. This seems to be sporadic and comes from time to time. We've never had that kind again. But again, I think that there are very few voices in South Africa that are South African voices and politicians in particular who are speaking out specifically around this. I think
speaking out against.
Yes.
Okay.
Against. I think the only voice that I've read about is Nkosazana Zuma, who came out recently and said, we shouldn't hate our neighbors. We shouldn't hate fellow Africans because they have so much to contribute to our economy, and they have so much to contribute to our lives, and they have been so generous in the past in giving us safe passage.
Okay, so I'll come back to you on this because they have been reported even politicians are fueling the xenophobic attacks, especially during this election period in South Africa. But Larry, coming to you, you are a young man, and a lot of these videos that we have seen of, South Africans attacking other Africans are just a group of young people who have perpetrated this. Now, as a young person, what is your perception of this? Have you ever seen these attacks? What moves young men, young people to attack other young people or other Africans? What is this drive?
Fortunately, in South Africa, I don't stay around an area whereby you get xenophobic attacks. But you can imagine when it's
Where
young
do you
people.
Stay?
I stay in Cresta.
Okay.
So you can imagine when there's young people who are hanging out, having a couple of drinks, then there comes this person who has a negative mindset of, you guys are seeing that our lives are not moving forward because a place that they are drinking at is owned by a foreigner. Then they start looting that place. They walk down the road, there's a couple of shops, they start looting them. But you ask some of them, since you have this idea that foreigners are taking your jobs, why are you not able to start the same shop once they have left? So it's just a small group of people. It's not like majority of the young people in South Africa all have this xenophobic mindset that foreigners are taking their jobs and all of that. It's not all of us. It's just a small group of people that in an unfortunate circumstance, the media gives them enough coverage to make it seem like it's the majority of young people in South Africa.
Interesting concept there. I mean, we have heard that some of these things happen usually in Durban and Johannesburg and in those areas as well. We did speak to a Rwandan who gave us a bit of clarity on this. We will listen to the interview in a bit. But here is another thing. I've spoken to some young people, Nigerians who've lived in South Africa, and I get this all the time. They say, South African men are lazy. I'm sorry, but this is what we hear. South African men are lazy. But then you've got these Nigerian guys. Let me use Nigerians as an example. They're young men, they're very hardworking, and they're very enterprising. They come into an environment and they see opportunities. That's one. Number two, there is also this report that a lot of South African women prefer Nigerian men or men from other African countries, thereby ignoring or rejecting proposals from young men. So these put together often aggravate these young men or a lot of South African men to go after other people from African countries. Is that true? And if that is the truth, how do you handle the situation?
Okay, in a way, I wouldn't necessarily agree that South African men are lazy, but I will tell you that some of South African men, quite a few, feel entitled that government must provide almost everything for them. Housing, government must create jobs for them, instead of them having to come up with a business plan. They rather say, no, the Department of Labor is not doing enough, the president is not doing enough to create jobs. But how's the president going to be able to create jobs where else he has a whole country to run that he can focus more on things? So they feel like they should be getting money, a stipend every single month, staying in, we have these houses called RDPs, working for some SOEs, the state-owned enterprises. So they feel entitled to the point whereby when they just get out of school and they see that they didn't perform well in high school, they can't get in university, they start blaming the government for them not having a job. Instead of having to put the blame on themselves that I didn't do well in high school, what is it that I can do to make sure that I progress in life? So it makes it seem like they are lazy, but I can tell you it's not necessarily laziness. It's just a form of some entitlement. Like, I know my country is rich, my country can give me this, so why aren't they giving me that? It's like coming from a rich family, your dad is a billionaire, but your dad is trying to teach you responsibility, and you're going like, I don't have to work if ever you have money, just give it to me, then I can be happy.
What about situations where it seems that Nigerian men or men from other African countries are taking your women? It sounds laughable, but I have gotten this reports over and over. First of all, is that true? I know it might not be in your case, but is that true? Have you heard those reports?
Yeah, of course I've heard those reports, but to be honest, there's just something about women, I bet in every single country, they like a new adventure. So you wouldn't necessarily go for something that you know how it's going to turn out. You always want to go for something that, this seems interesting. Okay, let me go, rather than having to go to, I know how this relationship is going to be like. So they rather say, let me just date a Nigerian man. But it's not all women, I can assure you.
I completely understand, but do their relationships actually turn out better with Nigerian men than they do with South African men?
I wouldn't necessarily they turn out better, because we never what happens behind closed doors. So you don't know what's the agreement between those two people. Okay. They may seem happy in public and it may look like, oh, she's driving a nice car or she's living in a nice house. But does it really mean happiness? We have found out in many cases that those kind of relationships whereby men are able to provide more than the men of the country, you sometimes get women being abused because of the material things that they get.
Of course.
So now we cannot necessarily say the relationship.
I'm sorry, I'm sticking with you on this one, because this is something that affects a lot of young people, and we have seen on social media. I have to admit, we've seen everything you see on social media isn't true, but we've seen a lot of these pictures, a lot of these visuals on social media where it tends as if South African men are more violent towards women. There is a high case of rape, according to reports of South African men against women. So there is always this drive towards, like you say, something different, foreigners who the outcome, like you say, could actually be better. The reason I'm driving at this is because I've heard a lot of young men who feel some of these is just out of jealousy. We took their women. And economic, yes, but then there is this social aspect of it. We seem to be getting more from their women, and it makes them very uncomfortable.
Clear. Again, I'll stick to the social media and media age. When you get news from a country, you exaggerate it. I mean, before I came to Nigeria, I thought Boko Haram is in every street. Like, you are not able to take a walk without being kidnapped. But I can walk at night, I can do whatever. You come to a country, you realize, why isn't it like the way they projected it, telling me that it's going to be like that? So it's not really like that.
Okay.
Please, Gabriel, could you give us a picture of what's going on in South Africa based on the xenophobic attacks?
Thank you very much for having me. Information coming to us is for the last few weeks is relevant that attacks happened on foreign migrants, not just Nigerians. Many people had to leave their places and seek shelter in churches and mosques in Durban. But we hear also of commotions or small attacks on isolated migrant communities in Cape Town, we hear in Mpumalanga, around here in Johannesburg in a place called Alexander Township. We are in a period of elections, general elections here, and it's not the first time that it happens. Normally in the past it was contestation of leadership and authority, but in local communities. But now we have seen it escalating, now going at national level. But of course attacks happen where people live, and that's why we hear it in different locations, different areas.
How many people have been killed in this recent attack?
The numbers are not clear, but I'm hearing since yesterday of an attack on a Nigerian in Cape Town and an attack on a Nigerian in Pretoria. I think about 2 or 3 people died, Nigerians this time. This period, it's because of elections happening, and people, they use soft targets like foreigners to try to make a point and to show to the voters that they know their concerns, they are speaking for them, they want to be voted.
Would you say the politicians are behind this xenophobic attacks, at least for this time?
I would say that generally the sentiment against foreign migrants, especially those of African origin, they are tapping into that, just try to garner votes for themselves.
What is the local South African authorities doing to protect migrants who are living in South Africa?
The government is trying their best, and this time, as I told you, a few politicians at national level tried to use this rhetoric of not wanting foreigners in the country. We are yet to see any strong action being taken by government on those who made those comments. But we are hopeful that now, because of the engagement between the government and even the African ambassadors in South Africa, we are hoping that they are now going to take it seriously and they are going to take all the measures necessary to make sure that lives are saved.
In 2015, Zuma sort of gave it an idea that it wasn't an xenophobic attack, it was more of thuggery. You know, a situation in 2015 where some Africans were killed, he called it thuggery. It was just a case of local businesses fighting each other. So somehow, I don't even think the South African government has come out to say this is xenophobia. Could you say that's the reason it's not been handled, and how politicians are handling it is fueling it?
I think that as far as political parties fueling this, I think certainly there's a fair amount of evidence that you know, politicians in an election year make promises. You've just been through an election year. What kind of promises did you get? They'll promise about jobs, they'll promise about education, housing, schooling, etc., and they'll put out a perception there that perhaps you know, foreigners are using up too many resources, for example, in hospitals, or using too many resources because no child in South Africa can be excluded from school, even if her parents are illegally living in the country, for example. So, you know, we have a very strong human rights access kind of culture. So those things do come up, and so people do have a perception that foreigners are taking away their slice of the pie. So, and I agree with you, I don't think enough has been done about educating and telling people that, I don't know, we can't tell people, but educating people to the benefits of having a migrant population.
Do you think the government calling it specifically xenophobia is going to make a difference? For reason is because, I mean, look at Rwanda. We know what happened in Rwanda, and it took 4 months and almost 1 million deaths for the government and the international community to say this is genocide. Do you think calling it xenophobia now, so that it becomes an awareness, a consciousness, and that education can take place, would be a good start, instead of just saying it's thuggery, it's just a few people fighting and all of that? Do you think it's time to name it, especially in South Africa?
I certainly, personally, this is my personal belief, I think it's time to name it, yes.
Larry?
I agree.
Well, I think the government needs to address it in a more violent way rather than just giving it a name. You can come out and you can have a press conference that, yes, this is xenophobic attacks. But what is it that you are doing to make sure that this xenophobic attacks stop? I don't want the president to only come out and say, yes, I've realized we have xenophobic attacks in South Africa. Send the military out then if you realize that these people, the police are not able to manage them. We all know South African military is one of the strongest military in Africa. But what are they used for besides having to aid other countries? Where else in our country there's a situation going on? But when there's Mozambican, other cyclone that happened, and in Zimbabwe, our military was quick to get there. Why can't we do the same in our own country when we realize that foreigners that we are helping in their countries, they're in danger in our country? Then send the military out so they can also be helped.
You're living in Nigeria. Do you disagree?
No, I definitely disagree. I believe that the military is there for national defense, and I believe that the police are there for internal the management of internal society. And I don't think, I don't believe that you should cross those paths.
But the police should be more aggressive in handling this.
I think that, you know, our police force is highly understaffed and overburdened in many ways, because there are many situations in South Africa that they can't handle. So certainly I agree with you that something has to happen. I'm not sure that you need to send the military and army. People in the army don't know how to deal with riotous situations. They know how to deal tactically with with military situations. So I don't think that they should come in. I think that, rethink of the police and how they deal with these kind of attacks is something. I do know that there's a school of thought, and I don't want to go into too much, but we have a situation in our country where we have many service delivery protests, and these service delivery protests take police away from their kind of day-to-day job because they are needed there to create secure barriers, etc., etc. So I think that maybe what is needed is a rethink of our police.
Finally, when you both are living and working in Nigeria right now, when you hear of xenophobic attacks in your country and you know that Nigerians are being affected, are being killed, are being hurt, do you fear for your safety living here that you may be attacked or reprisal attacks could come against you? And based on that, how would you communicate that to your government for your safety as well, wherever you are living or working, or for other South Africans living in other African countries whose citizens are being victims or are being targeted in your country? Larry.
It's a very uncomfortable feeling knowing exactly what happens in South Africa, even though I know it's a small group of people who are causing that. But
it doesn't sound like that out here.
It doesn't sound like that in Nigeria. So it's a very uncomfortable feeling that maybe I might step out, someone hears that I'm South African, and that person's family member has been affected, and they go like, all right, now it's time for revenge. So it's an uncomfortable feeling, I can tell you that.
Ms. Cecilia, government putting that into perspective, because I don't think it's a possibility that South African government hasn't
I feel deeply ashamed of xenophobic attacks in South Africa. I feel that they are, completely unacceptable in every way. I have only been here for a very short time. I have only experienced incredible warmth from Nigerians. I hope that this warmth will continue, because I hope that the message is that it's not all people that come from South Africa that feel this way about Nigeria. And certainly not all people from South Africa condone this. And not all people from South Africa we would like to see everybody living, in harmony, and we'd like to spread a message that, Nigerians and other foreigners are welcome in our country to contribute to the country, just as I hope I'm going to be contributing to your country.
Thank you so very much, Cecilia, and of course, Larry, for taking our time to talk to us. This is quite a sensitive conversation and intense as well, so we would like to get your comments on what we have talked about, all the facets of our conversation right here on the comment section of this video. You're watching Roots TV Nigeria. My name is Gloria Oji Emode.